All right guys, today we're going to be talking about the planter hookup to the back of the tractor. A lot of these hoses here, they can be a little intimidating staring at them to hook them up to the tractor at the beginning of the season. So try to ease the hookup and talk about some important hoses that need to go in a certain location. The planter frame lift control, whether you have markers or no markers, they're independent or automatic tied into the frame lift. Those can go in your 1 and 2 spot. The main important is your vacuum blower pressure. We want to make sure that is going in the right hand side of whatever SCV you choose, so that when you engage it for pressure, you can also then go forward into float to turn it down and allow that motor to coast to a stop, rather than come to an abrupt stop and possibly damage our motor seals.
So here we're doing our preseason check of our PTO generator for all electric drive planters. You can see we've got the gearbox split from the generator itself. Basically what I want to do here is I want to take a good look at these splines. Here's an example of one, and we'll show it in a picture a little bit later. But you can see this one wasn't greased and the splines are actually extremely worn. What we want to do is when we get this apart, we want to clean these splines out decent, both sides. And I'm going to take some of this extreme duty synthetic grease from John Deere. Just apply a nice coat of that to both sides. And I want to do that at the beginning of each season, and then depending on how many acres, if you do quite a bit of acres, it's not a bad idea to do it halfway through the season. On top of that, we also like to drain our oil in our PTO gear case, and that takes a high guard, just your standard transmission fluid.
Hey guys, we're going to talk about mounting the PTO generator system onto this tractor. First thing I want to point out is the temperature sensor on the bottom here of the gear case. Before you install it, make sure the sensor is not cracked or damaged, and definitely be careful when mounting it on the tractor, because you don't want to damage it and find out when you engage it that the temperature reading is not working. Second, I've already got the alternator bolted to the gear case. You can install it as one assembly. It makes it quite a bit heavier, or you can leave the gear case separate, install it first, and then go ahead and bolt the alternator on after the fact. Let's go ahead and muscle this thing up in here. Once it's slid on the shaft, go ahead and slide it all the way forward. You'll take your mounting bracket that's specific for your tractor drawbar. Thread the bolts in. On the right hand side, it's always a fixed hole usually, and the left side has got a slot in the bracket. It's important that you want to take the weight and lift it up when you go ahead and tighten this side on the slot. If you get too much play up and down yet, go ahead and loosen it and try to achieve by removing the play. That way it fits tight on there, as the rubber isolators will seat in. Okay, as we hook up the hoses, let's talk about the hose connections we have. The case drain is a flat face tip. It can only plug into the receiving on the tractor side as a flat face tip helper at the bottom. Next we'll go with our main frame pressure in return for our lift and lower. Put those on number 1. Frame pressure will go on the left. Frame return will go on the right as we stand behind looking at the tractor. Next we'll go with this planter here has no markers. If you had marker hoses, you would go ahead and probably put them in your number 2 spot. Next we'll go with our vac pressure. So I'll take the left vac and run that in to my lower SCV. I'll take number 3 in this particular configuration in my right vac pressure and number 4 on the right side. That way we go forward with the trigger in the cab for pressure and then farther forward into float when we want to shut it down. Vac returns. They can either be individual hoses or in some cases teed together to go into a motor return coupler. If your scenario has them individual, you can run them back into the appropriate SCV on the left side, or if you have them tied together or available motor return couplers, you'll go below the SCVs in the return coupler. This planter with variable rate, we'll take our pressure hose, and an SCV is preferred if you have an available one. So I will go ahead and put that in number 2. On the right side, treat it just like a vac for pressure going forward, and we want to shut it down. You'll go into float and then return on the left side. If you don't have enough SCVs on your tractor, the variable rate can go into a Power Beyond circuit and a motor return.
So talking about our Power Beyond and our motor returns, a lot of times guys get these messed up, or confused I should say. What we see here is usually they come out, they extend from the block, and a lot of times the tractors themselves, if you look back on the casting, you'll see a P or an R. P standing for power, R for return. We mentioned our motor returns. For our vacs, the tips will look like this. The reason they look like this is a one-way check valve. That way we can't accidentally plug it into an SCV and run our motors backwards. This is also open. You'll notice when the planter is not being used, these will seep oil, and that is normal. The reason they do that is for thermal expansion. When we plug that in, these bottom 2 here, these will be our motor returns. The reason we go into the motor return is that it's constant flow back into the system and not the sump, as some tractors can starve for oil. Our Power Beyond, this is another option for our variable rate should we want to, but we just have to remember that this is not controlled. This has power, hydraulics to it when the tractor is running, no matter what. So the pneumatic downforce on the planters, there's 2 different types. We have the electric pump, which is what we're showing here, and we have our hydraulic pumps, which we'll show here later. Basically at the beginning of the season, with these electric pumps, we don't want to run these electric pumps for long periods of time. So if we need to add air to the system at the beginning of the year, if it's all leaked down, we actually want to do that with a separate compressor at the back of the tank. So here we're seeing the tank and the valve block for our electric compressor. At the beginning of each season, it's a good recommendation to come down here to our drain, crack the drain, and allow all the condensation and the moisture that's developed in the tank to drain out of the system. When I talked about pre-filling the system, this is the valve stem in which you'll see, which we'll use, and we'll be using shop air to do so, and that will actually inflate, put air to our bags, and the compressor itself will then take over when we're going through the field and inflate our pressurize our tank. Should you need to know it, we have 2 valves here. We can fill and exhaust our airbags without having to use the display.
So another maintenance item we want to do on the planter, at least once every year, is we want to make sure our vac tubes are all cleaned out. This planter here, we use some of the tubes for the chassis as our vacuum chambers. So they'll get filled up with dust, talc, everything else. So they come with plates on the end that you can unbolt, then you can get in there and clean them out. So you can also visually see it if you take your cover off. You can look in there and see how much dust and dirt is built up in there. You want that to be fairly clean so you don't have any issues with things getting plugged up. Have consistent vacuum across the planter. You'll have caps on the main frames as well as on the wings on the 1790, 1795 chassis. The 30-inch row planters have a little bit different setup on them, but there is vac tubes on them as well to get cleaned out.
Now we're going to go through the bleed procedure of the hydraulic downforce system. You all should have received a loop hose like this with a hydraulic downforce planter. It's got flat face couplers on it. On the planter, there's a series of hookups on the ends and in the middle of the frame that you're going to need to hook up to individually. With the planter or the tractor turned off, no power, pressure to it, go ahead and hook these up. Then we'll go in the tractor and make sure you have one of your SCVs with no hoses in it and set that to a continuous detent and click that to run full pressure for your Power Beyond circuit. That will purge in this section any air that may be trapped in there. You'll go ahead and shut the SCV back off, turn the tractor off, disconnect the hoses, and go to the next section and repeat the procedure. The best place to store this loop hose is in the tractor with you in case there's any service work that gets done in the field. This can always be utilized then to purge any air out.
So at the beginning of the season, we get ready to pull these planters out. A lot of times we have calls from guys, the planter has leaned over the course of the season in storage. Usually that happens when guys don't put in the stops, and I do recommend when guys go to store these that they set the stops in the back and set the machine down on the stops, for the simple fact that we can avoid that. A lot of times, the calls I've had, the machine was in the corner of the building and up tight against the wall of the building. Obviously, we're trying to avoid getting the machine to come into contact with the building. The customer goes to raise the machine and it just further makes the machine lean to one side or the other, making the problem even worse. I just wanted to show guys how to rephase their planter while it is still folded up in the building. Basically, you'll see here the wings are going to go down as we don't have the stops in, but you will want the stops in the wings to keep the wings from going down if it's a 1790, 1795. What we'll do is we'll put it in transplant wing wheels, and we're going to go ahead and lower the wing wheels. And like I said, you're seeing the wings go down, but they won't go down if you have the stops in, so I recommend keeping the stops in. So now my wing wheels are still all the way down. I'm going to go ahead and put it in plant while it's still folded. With that being done, I want to simultaneously lower the 3-point, which would lower the hitch, as well as lower the frame with your number 1 SCV. This lowers the planter completely. Andy, if you can kind of pan back and show them it's sitting on, how the whole thing's sitting on the ground. As I'm doing this, I'm holding the SCV down. That's allowing the planter to rephase. Our planters always rephase when in the down position and in detent. So like if you're going through the field, it is constantly rephasing. Now, after holding that about 15 seconds, I'm gonna go ahead and raise everything just opposite way of what I did. You see the whole thing coming up level. I'm running the 3-point and my number 1 SCV. There you can see my planter's level. And at that point, you should be good to be able to pull out of the building. Put it back in transplant. Raise my wing wheels. Good to go. At the beginning of each season, we want to go through and just double check all of our calibrations as far as our sensors are concerned. Planters with active pneumatic downforce, we want to zero out the pressure sensors. Our gauge wheel sensors, we want to zero those out and just basically start all new at the beginning of the year, as it will affect performance. So to do so, we go to our planter page. As you see here, we go to our diagnostics and calibrations. We go to our calibrations tab, and on this planter we only have gauge wheel downforce. We do not have any kind of way to zero out our pressure for our tank, because we have hydraulic downforce. But basically we'll go to our gauge wheel downforce, begin calibration, wheel speed must be 0, planter must be raised, follow our steps. And once calibration is successful, it should zero out all of our sensors to start all new for the beginning of the year.